Pearson speaker for this evening. Darlene is going to be giving a talk on Ottawa's urban forest, specifically Centertown Neighbourwoods tree canopy project. And a little bit about Darlene. Darlene has had a long and busy career in various aspects of environmental sustainability, protected area establishment and management, and Indigenous rights. In retirement, you think she might slow down, but it turns out she's just as busy now because she's chosen to focus on where she lives and be very actively engaged. Darlene is one of the founding members of a small climate change advocacy group called Citizen Climate Council that pushes the Ottawa City Council to be accountable for its climate promises. She is also on the board of the Centertown Community Association. In 2021, Darlene started the Centertown Neighbourwoods tree canopy project and worked with 30 volunteers to collect data on trees in Centertown. After 2 successful seasons, they hope to begin a stewardship plan to protect and enhance Centertown's trees. Darlene also co-chairs a climate change working group within the Centertown Community Association to proactively address local issues of climate resiliency and adaptation. To date, they have collaborated with other associations on an initiative to update the city's idling control bylaw and with a panel discussion on climate resiliency. When not busy with various volunteer projects, you'll find Darlene cross-country skiing in winter and canoeing Ontario's lakes and rivers in the summer. After Darlene's presentation, we'll continue with open conversation about this evening's theme. Darlene, welcome. We're so looking forward to your talk tonight.
Thank you, everybody. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you. And I also want to say I appreciate very much the devotional readings tonight and also the video and Lua's songs. They're all on a theme and they are a wonderful reminder of the bounty and sacredness of nature. My own speech tonight will be a little more prosaic, but so it's a bit of a counterbalance to what we have just heard. I'm just going to put up, I did a PowerPoint presentation so that you have something else to look at other than a talking head. And I'll just put it up on the screen if I may. Do I have the share function?
Just a minute, Darlene.
Here we go. So many of you will know Stephen for his ability to produce wonderful pictures, and I don't compete with him. But my talk tonight is showing these pictures because it's more of what we're dealing with in Centertown. These are taken right after the ice storm.
Darlene,
Hello?
we aren't able to see your screen yet.
Oh dear. Then I'm not sure.
Sharing?
I'm not sure that the share is working then.
I can display the slides from my side if you'd like.
Okay, so if the share isn't working, I'd much appreciate then if you would put them on.
Certainly.
Okay, this is where I was talking to. So it's pictures after the ice storm, and it's showing that we've got mature trees that have been lost, huge limbs off branches, trees with those unmistakable hydro Ottawa V cuts, lots of hard space, lots of paving, front yards that people like to cover with hard surface rather than leave room for vegetation. Some rather spindly little trees planted in front of a community housing project that have been struggling. And the only good tree picture is of a little leaf linden that because of our presentations at planning committee, we managed to save from development. Next slide, please. So the situation that our urban forest faces in Centertown is that we have one of the lowest canopy covers according to the city's own documents. And the little picture at the right is again from the city, a heat island map of Centertown, and you'll see that it's mostly orange and yellow with very little green. Trees, again, the city acknowledges they're one of the best tools available to mitigate climate change, so they're an important aspect that we need to pay attention to. And our big fear in Centertown is that new plantings are not keeping up with some of the tree loss I showed on the first slide. And who gets to bear the brunt of that? It's we, the residents of Centertown. Please, next slide. So we know that climate change is going to be inducing greater stress from increased heat, drought, severe storms. We've already experienced some of it, and there is more to come. And this is going to affect the health of our trees. It'll lead to increased tree mortality, structural failure in trees, and susceptibility to pests and disease. And yet we need these trees because they're a vital climate adaptation tool. Next slide, please. Everybody likes to walk on the shady side of the street. Trees provide the attenuation from heat. They improve the air quality by filtering out pollutants with their leaves. Their roots provide water retention so that not everything has to flow into our storm sewers during rainfalls, extreme or otherwise. They reduce noise on busy streets. They provide habitat for wildlife. They add to both the physical and psychological well-being of us. And of course, their beauty is one of the most important things that we appreciate. And that beauty has actually been proven to add 5 to 10% to property value if you have a tree in your front yard. Next slide. So what are the tools that the city of Ottawa has to manage trees? Well, one of them is the Urban Forest Management Plan. The current one has been in place since 2018 and it goes till 2037. And it has a wonderful vision for the urban forest as being healthy, diverse, resilient, growing, and sustaining our health and well-being. And some of the principles in that plan are interesting. The first one that is my favorite is that the urban forest must be recognized and managed as a valuable infrastructure asset. It's not an operating expense, it's an asset, and it's a positive investment. That message does not necessarily seem to have been transmitted to the other city departments, but I'll leave that for discussion after. It tells people to be bold and innovate in how they manage the forest. It has places a high emphasis on equity so that everybody should have equitable access to the benefits that trees provide. And again, it stresses that trees are valuable and that large trees in particular require special consideration. Next slide, please. The other major municipal policy tool is the tree protection bylaw. And its purview is a bit limited because not every tree gets protected. Only what they call distinctive trees with 30-centimeter diameter at breast height. That's what DBH stands for. In the urban area and 50 centimeters diameter in the suburban area. So although the bylaw says you can't damage or remove a tree without a permit, it has a very low replacement value for a tree. So if somebody cuts down a mature silver maple in their front yard, their only penalty is $400. And yet that silver maple that's grown for decades is much more valuable than that assigned value. They do require a replacement in a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio, depending on the size of the tree to be removed. But I question the adequacy of these protection measures. Next slide. I should also point out that those the urban forest management plan applies only to city trees, and yet over 60% of trees in any part of Ottawa is on private land. So they're not subject to any management by the city. So Neighbourwoods is the methodology that our group uses to operate under. And it's chosen by us because it doesn't require any expertise. You don't have to be a forester, you don't have to be a biologist. You just have to have some eyes that can observe a tree in front of you. It gives us the advantage of being something that will provide consistent and technically correct data. It can be used at either the individual tree level or at a neighborhood level. And we're going to be using it to generate information for an eventual stewardship plan. Next slide, please. So why are we doing all of this? Because as was mentioned in the introduction, we're doing an inventory of the trees in Centertown. And to be able to speak from a position of knowledge with any city official, we have to know what we have and where we have it and what we are missing. So that's why we're out there measuring trees, and the compilation of the data produces some interesting results. Next slide. I'll get to the results in a minute, but part of the reason that this is easy citizen science is that our tools are pretty simple. You can see people in the picture using a diameter tape to measure the diameter of the tree. It looks like they're measuring the circumference, but this tape has the magical ability to translate circumference into diameter. And for somebody dyslexic like me, it saves a lot of mistakes in math calculations. We use a long tape to be able to measure the crown width. And we have a bunch of apps that we can use. There are different apps we use for tree identification. And there's even one that we can use to calculate the tree height. A bunch of us have acquired books on trees that are useful for identification. And we use the city's own maps to plot our route among the city's trees. Next slide, please. And that's an example of the map. It's available online. It's called Geo Ottawa. And the advantage is that it shows the buildings, the street addresses, and the green blobs are tree canopy. It doesn't necessarily identify individual trees, but we get an idea of where we're looking. Next slide, please. So what do we record? I apologize that this picture is sideways. We record about 30 different data points, everything from location to where the tree is it front or side yard, the size, what species is it interfering with it, are wires interfering with the tree or the sidewalk or other traffic indications. And then we record quite a number of conditions. And this ranges from defoliation. And by that, I mean, are the leaves thinning on certain parts of the tree, whether it's the crown or the branches? Has a tree developed a lean? And are the roots pulling out of the soil? Are their roots exposed? Is there rot or cavities? And all of these things are what anybody can observe very easily. We're not trying to diagnose mold or tree diseases, because that's beyond our expertise. But it's quite amazing what you can record just from visual observation. Next slide. And this is how we can display some of the information that our data gives us. We can estimate tree age based on the diameter width. And this is because the analysis program that was developed by the professors who created this methodology uses a relative diameter, so that a tree, for example, a lilac tree at a certain age will have one size of diameter. An oak tree at a certain age will have a different size of diameter. Different trees grow to different sizes and widths. And so they have been able to do relative diameters. So all of our data on different species comes out to give us a chart like this, so that on the bar chart showing red and blue, the red is the optimum, the blue is the current. And so it shows that young trees are too few in Centertown compared to what the target should be. And on the other side of the graph, the blue is the current number of very mature trees, and the target is less. So we have an imbalance in what is optimal in Centertown for tree age. The second shows the top 10 species, and I don't know whether you can read it on your computer, but we have an overabundance of maples. If I add up the Norway maples, the Manitoba maples, silver, sugar, red, and amber maples, we come to about 40%. And that's way over what we should have for species diversity. The reason for that being, if you have too much of one species, they could become subject to disease or pests, and you could wipe out a huge amount of your canopy if that's the case. That's what happened with Dutch elm disease. That's what's happening with the emerald ash borer. So the greater diversity you have in tree species, the more healthy your canopy can be over time. Next slide, please. Again, very quickly, we have too many introduced trees compared to native trees. And that affects the diversity of our wildlife, because not all insects find the food they need in introduced species compared to native species. Tree conditions, it shows that we have the trees surveyed are mostly healthy, but we do have a number with major structural defects, and that would be branches that are not in a healthy attachment and could fall off, or there's an unhealthy lean in the tree and it could be blown over. These kinds of things. Next slide. This is a map of Centertown showing in red the areas that we have surveyed, and we have a long way to go. But we've been making absolutely significant progress, because we've actually surveyed over 1,500 trees in the 2 summers that we've been at this. Next slide. So how do we do it? Well, we organize it into teams. So right now we have 6 teams, and each team picks the blocks that they want to work on. We give advance notice to residents by putting flyers in mailboxes, which lets them know we're coming. The teams basically pick the times that they want to go out. We've got some teams of people who are still working full time, so they go out evenings. Other teams mostly of retired people like me are happier going out during the day. And we've got the manual prepared by the professors who developed this program, which guide us in how to rate what we're looking at. If like how severe is the tree lean, for example, or what percentage of defoliation do we see, and how do we code that? Next slide. So what are we going to do next? For sure, this year we're gearing up to prepare to do our 3rd season of surveying trees. but we also want to have a greater advocacy role for trees. I've looked at the ward tree planting plans, which are made available to each councillor in every ward across the city, but not publicly, but you can request them through the councillor. And that gives us an idea of what they propose to plant. And we actually went out and checked, did they plant 54 trees they said they would plant in Centertown? And yes, they did, but what we found was not necessarily all sunshine and light, because except for 2 trees in Preston, they put no support around trees, and the sidewalk clearance machines have made gouges out of the bark of lots of them, and piling snow against a young sapling will inevitably make it lean. So we've got a bunch of newly planted trees whose viability is open to question. We publish articles in the Centertown Buzz, and this year we're going to be putting a bigger emphasis on the Trees and Trust program. That's the city program that allows residents to get a free tree planted on the city allowance or right-of-way at the front of their property. And your only obligation is to water that tree for 3 years to make sure it's well established. You know, as I was saying earlier, our goal is to have a stewardship plan, because the trees are not just on city property, but on private property. And our percentage for our first season showed that 67% of trees in Centertown are on private property. I personally have been having a lot of fun. I've gotten to meet people while going around doing surveys. We meet neighbors that we'd otherwise wouldn't have met. We get to see amazing backyards with people who created wonderful oases. We've gotten to see some not quite so nice ones, so we do have some work to do. We do an inventory of plantable spaces as well, and we're trying to work with the city to encourage the city to take an approach to planting that's more geared to the limited space we have in Centertown. By that I mean we don't have big front lawns like the suburbs, or but we do have spaces in front yards that can accommodate either small or medium-sized trees, and some lots even bigger mature trees that won't interfere with overhead wires. So we've got our work cut out for us for the seasons to come, and I'll end my talk there and leave some time for questions.
Darlene, thank you so much. That was very interesting. I think we're probably all thinking about the neighborhoods that we live in and the situations with trees that we see around us, and that we should have a lot of good questions or comments, discussions. And I see that Bill has his hand up, so why don't you lead us off here, Bill?
So yes, this is like really good. The first thing that I was thinking about was, what is the scalability? What would be the desired or perceived wise scalability of this? Like, for example, you at the end there, you mentioned that what's good for us in Centertown may not be what's good for us in the suburbs, and a different approach and a different set of priorities may if we had the same kind of operation going, say, in Greeley, may come up with a bunch of different priorities to try to communicate and get consideration by the city. And we all live in one city. And I was thinking, well, what they're doing is micro-focused, and this is really effective for getting done what needs to be done in their area. But we do have this large city that is challenged significantly with regard to its green spaces and trees. How can we scale what you're doing to other to have the same kind of thing going on in other places, and the benefit of the economies of scale that everybody working together or being connected in some way might have. It occurred to me that like, well, maybe like there's a bunch of different Rotary clubs in the area. Maybe those Rotary clubs who are just now getting environment committees and are looking for something to do would like to start doing something like this. And it would engage a lot of people who aren't otherwise actively engaged, maybe just mentally or have affinity with what's being done, and it would actually bring that to fruition. So would like to get some feedback from you in terms of how receptive your group and the people operating in that group would be to working with other areas or perhaps service organizations like Rotary Club, for example, to scale what you're doing to cover the entire canopy of Ottawa.
Excellent question. I neglected to say that we're not the only group in Ottawa that's using this methodology. There is a group in Old Ottawa South, another one in Canada Blackburn, Beaverbrook, excuse me. I think there's one that started in Blackburn Hamlet, and there are a couple of others. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank right now, but there are at least half dozen who are using the same methodology in different parts of the city. And so it's not just inner city, there's some suburban, not necessarily rural. But that's just a matter of, it's whatever community has decided that they want to take this on. There's also the Café's group. I don't know whether you're familiar with them. It stands for Community Associations for Environmental Sustainability, and they actually have a tree caucus that meets about once a month virtually. And that has some representation from the more rural parts of Ottawa compared to the group that I'm talking about. So there is quite a bit of interest. Trees are quite a rallying cry, I found. For example, the Teewin example out by Carlsbad got that whole community riled up, rightly so. But the rest, a lot of the rest of communities in Ottawa supported that, supported them in their outrage at illegal action. But Bill, I think that if there were a particular community who wanted to get in touch and find out more about what we do, there are a number of us who'd be more than happy to speak with them. There's also a group called Capital Forest, Forêt Capitale, and they plant groups of trees. They don't want to plant one-off trees, like one per residential property, but they look for properties where they can plant like 100 trees in one go. So they've been planting trees more in Orleans and some of the more outer built up areas in Ottawa. So they're another group that's doing good work. So that should be a beginning of an answer to your question, I hope.
Yes, that's a very good rundown that we'll be able to go through and work things out wherever we're from. The missing component there that I think might be something to be addressed is some level of coordination between these kinds of groups, so that when there's an effort to impact policy making or policy implementation, that there's a stronger feeling of more pressure as a result of the size and depth and constituency of the group. So I guess what I'm looking for, beyond everything that you just presented, which is really excellent to get started, but is there a trend toward or a desire for, or people be amenable to looking to try to coordinate these individual efforts out there so that it becomes a unified a group of people that essentially provides for more attention when it comes to making things happen.
For now, I think it's cafes that's providing that coordinating role. And there's certainly a number of groups that attend the tree caucus who aren't just individuals, and they're not necessarily from groups similar to mine, but there are other groups that would have an interest in tree protection.
Okay, thank you for that, Bill, and for your response, Darlene. Leslie and then Heather.
Yeah, I'm part of the Glebe Community Association Environmental Group, and they do very similar thing with an emphasis actually on the trees and trust, and give out cards with the membership drive for the community association to encourage homeowners to, if they have space, to request a tree to be planted by the city. But it seems that it is the community association itself in each, and maybe Lower Town also may have a group, I'm not sure, but Old Ottawa South, it's the community association that is developed through its environmental committee, a tree group that's working on this kind of tree canopy, and cafes, the community association federation sort of pulls together all those people. So Greeley may have a community association that would be interested in taking it on, or they may be working on a particular area of Greeley. I don't know if you've been in touch with the community association, Bill, there.
Yeah, I've actually worked very closely with Jennifer Humphreys on various aspects. And you're right, they're not using the Neighbourwoods methodology, but they've done a lot of work on promoting tree planting. And that's one of the things we try to do as we go around. We do have a whole bunch of the Trees and Trust brochures, and we hand them out where we can, but we're trying to figure out a way to make it a more personal approach this year so that we can get more uptake. This underscores the fact that the city itself doesn't promote its own program. At Earth Day that Stephen was mentioning, we had a whole bunch of Trees and Trust brochures, and anybody we gave one to said, "Oh, I didn't know about this." So it's unfortunate, but it falls to community-based groups to try to promote the city's own programs and program. And we're happy to do that if we can encourage greater uptake.
Yeah, I have a lovely story about that. I was part of an anti-idling demonstration outside Muchmore School a few weeks ago, probably a month ago. And there was a young girl who was walking by with her father, and they had planted trees in the glebe, as you had that a lot. I think there were sort of 20 planted around the outside of the schoolyard, and they're young saplings, and the kids had been swinging on them or pulling on the branches or whatever. And one of the classes had made little posters, hand-drawn posters saying, look after the trees, be gentle, they're young, that kind of stuff. And they were all along the fence. And so this little girl was telling us, she must have been 8 years old. She said, those things along there, our class. And I said, well, which one is yours? And she said, they're all mine. Like all 8 of them. This little girl was just a campaigner for trees, and she went on to explain how you had to protect trees when they were young, because if you pull on the branches, or if you pull, try to weigh yourself on the branch. And she offered to join the community association environmental group, which is all over 50, and we said we'd love to have you come. Anyway, there are young campaigners out there too, which is really nice to see.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Please go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that I think people are feeling very sad about the state of trees right now, between the windstorm and now the ice storm. I live in Lower Town, and we've lost a lot of trees, a lot, not just in Lower Town, but over the bridge around Beechwood and New Edinburgh and all that. some are huge old trees that have come down, that have just cracked in half. And I think people feel really discouraged because they thought that the trees that survived the windstorm would survive the ice storm, but they didn't. And I think people would like to know ways that the trees that we have can be saved, because I know there is a statistic somewhere about the percentage of trees that the city plants. They don't all live. There's quite a large percentage that don't live. So the government's saying we will plant 1 billion trees. That doesn't mean we're going to have a forest of 1 billion trees. Unless you look after these trees, like this little girl was saying, they will not grow. So I was just wondering if people were doing something about that, and also about pruning, because if trees are pruned properly, it seems to me that they last longer, are less apt to come down or bring other trees down. If you had any comments on that.
You're absolutely right, Heather. Pruning is essential. And yes, it costs money, but it's money well spent. Personally, I contribute to pruning costs of my neighbor's absolutely magnificent 100-year-old silver maple. It's the tree that lured me into being a crusader for trees. It's such a powerful presence that I get to look at every day. And I think that that's what saved it, because we've done pruning about every 4 years. And it did lose a couple of branches, but nothing that would affect the major stems or the major big branches. So the pruning does work. The other thing you mentioned is taking care of the trees. You have to water it. And I actually think that we need to pay attention to watering our mature trees more than we did in the past. We have these prolonged periods of drought. And I think the trees really suffer from it. I do think that some of our big trees are under climate stress from the variable and extreme weather we've been having, because I can't help but think that, you know, the ice storm that we had wasn't all that severe. It didn't last that long. The ice melted within 24 hours, and yet it brought down huge limbs. And when I see some of the limbs that were brought down, it was so they were twisted off the tree, or the tree twisted. And yet what is revealed is not rot. It's just a branch that's gone. So there must be something going on with our climate that is weakening a lot of our trees. And the best we can do is make sure they get what they need, which is pruning and water, among other things.
Yeah, I noticed that walking around here is a lot of the branches, and now you've seen the city has kind of cut them as well. There's no rot in those limbs.
No.
They're good limbs. They've just twisted right off. They've fallen off. Yeah. And it makes people very sad. People want these trees. They want to live in a place with mature trees. And so, yeah, I really think the watering and the pruning is really important. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Heather. Stephen?
Yes. Yeah, in Centertown, we have lots of what I would call heritage trees, because they're over 100 years old and they're really big. Like the tree next door to us is perhaps one of the oldest and biggest that I know of in all of Centertown. And boy, if the big branches come down from that, it's going to crack the road in half, or take out part of a house or something. They're huge branches. But I wanted to say, in the Neighbourwoods program, Darlene arranged for training with the with one of the two people that started the Neighbourwoods program at the U of T. And so quite a group, I don't know, there must have been about 50 that started off getting the training. And then some of the people petered out, but actually we had started off with a good number of groups, and then we also started training people on the job. As we went around, some neighbors decided, well, we'd like to join. And so they joined in. And we have one fellow that comes from outside Centertown who asked if he could join, and he's been part of a team. And so that's spreading the training beyond this area. So that's another way in which connections are being made. And as I understand, we have 7 new volunteers as a result of the fair, Earth Day fair. And some of them started immediately by helping out with the displays and discussions with people we had at the fair. So it's really quite amazing, the community interest. And lots of people stopping and asking questions during Earth Day. And so one thing too is it's interesting when you do the survey, you find out there are a lot of maples and a lot of cedars and a lot of spruce. There's a few trees where there's many of them, but you find all kinds of other interesting ones like the Russian olive trees and and other trees, some of which are not really suited for the Ottawa climate yet, but they're there if they're in a sheltered enough area. And so we had quite a long list of species that were actually identified during the surveys. And we really draw on everyone's abilities. Although we use, say, apps for some of the identification, sometimes they're completely wrong. And it's because we know they're wrong. And we check books and we check our own knowledge that we built up over time to counter any of these mistakes. And we quite often have to debate what we put in for some of the codes as to how badly the tree is damaged or whatever. And so it's a real team effort to carry it off. And it's quite interesting program.
I'll just add one thing. Our neighbor right next door, that Stephen mentioned, the veteran tree, has attracted many people, because sometimes it's not unusual to see somebody come and just admire it, and some people try to put their arms around it, but it's so wide. It
takes about 4 people to put their arms around it.
It does attract a lot of admiration and interest from people. So it's quite amusing in a way to see somebody trying to hug a tree.
Yeah, and I should say that Stephen does an admirable job as one of the team leaders, and his group manages to survey an amazing number of trees each season. So, and not only that, he takes many pictures of trees, and they are a wonderful attraction at our Earth Day celebration, because they really illustrate not only teams in action and what we're doing looks like, but also illustrates the wonderful variety that we do enjoy in Ottawa. And it touches some part of people's psyche, and we maintain about the same number of volunteers every year. There are lots of returning volunteers. People drop out usually for, they're transferred, they're moving away, or they've got other commitments, and then we get new volunteers. So I find it very heartening that there are a lot of people out there who support our work. When we walk around the neighborhood doing trees, they'll see a bunch of us and we're all standing around looking up, and they'll say, "You must be the tree people." So we're recognizable and they all make positive comments. Thank you for looking after our trees. So that really gives us a lot of encouragement to keep on going.
One thing more I just wanted to add, all of us there's a large group that are part of a committee of the community association called the Tree and Green Space Committee. And we've really, as a group, kind of disparate group, we've really pulled together and been able to pull off a wide variety of projects. And
Plant and tree sale.
yeah, the plant and tree sale, the starting a community garden and so on. But one thing was interesting. The chair of our committee said he's in one of the survey groups, and he said it's the best way to know, like you really know your neighborhood, because you look at like every inch of it. You know, there's hardly a place that you don't look at as you're going down each block. And so it's not just the trees, we're observing everything, and how the trees fit into that.
Before I go back to Bill, who has his hand up, I'd like to invite anyone who hasn't yet spoken or asked a question. If you have something you'd like to say. Okay, Bill, the floor is yours.
Well, I just have another question. You mentioned in your presentation, Darlene, with the quantity of maple trees, and the sense that the species, a variety of species, is out of balance with what would be natural. And I was just wondering what maybe you knew about what the consequences of that were, and like, for example, in terms of diversity of bird species and overall quantity of other creatures, including the birds. Maybe you could speak to that.
Well, that's exactly true, Bill. If you only have maple trees, you only have certain kinds of insects that will live in maple trees. And birds are very discerning about what they eat. So you're going to limit your bird population, and while you're limiting your insect population. And as I alluded to earlier, if there is some new tree pest or tree disease that we don't know about yet, that comes from a foreign country, and our trees don't have any defense against it, as was the case with the emerald ash borer, then we risk losing a huge swath of canopy if it's only one, if the majority is one species. And there should only be 10% of any species. And so that gives you an idea of how far out of whack Centertown is if we're having 40% maples.
And if we were in a position to need to plant some trees, would you have a short list of species that you think might contribute to a better balance?
There's no easy answer to that question. I have a list of trees for all kinds of things, because it really, you have to plant the right tree in the right place. So a tree that would be great for a front yard, because it grows tall and it'll provide lots of shade, may not be good because it grows too tall and you've got hydro wires. So you shouldn't plant that species. You want to plant something that's shorter. You don't want to plant certain species right beside the street, like in some of the rare boulevards that we have in Ottawa, because of the salt. So you need trees that are salt tolerant, and there are lists of trees for that. There are trees that are drought tolerant, and I sincerely hope the city is looking into planting species that will be good with our evolving climate. Because there's certainly species that are good in the northeastern US, that will now be able to tolerate our conditions because it's warmer. So those are the kinds of things that people should be looking to. Café's put out a manual called the Ottawa Tree Planting Manual last year. It's available online on their website, and that one gives a whole bunch of suggestions as to tree species. There's also a guide that's put out by Southern Ontario Gardens, and it's promoting planting native species. So it shows what not to plant, but then it gives suggestions for alternatives. So depending on whether you've got sandy soil or clay soil or full sun and the actual location of your plant, it's hard for me to give a definitive answer, to give you a list that you can walk away with. But I'd be happy to send on copies of these things that I've referred to so that you can look them up, because they do go into specifics of, you know, what kind of conditions they tolerate. And I think that's a better way to make a decision.
That'd be great. I think it would be something that would be valuable to share with others that we're working with on these things.
I'm happy to do that. Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate, you know, that it's just great to know we have someone like you around. So we appreciate that for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I might ask a question, or first a comment. I mean, I think this is such a wonderful example of, you know, a community-based kind of grassroots organization. You know, that it does make you think about, wow, how could I maybe do that in my little neck of the woods, so to speak. You know, and all the fruits that this brings to the neighborhood in terms of unity and in terms of collaboration. And just, you know, Neighbourwoods is a really appropriate name for it, you know, because you're making these connections, you know, and you're developing really a collective of people. In addition to, you know, talking about trees like as individuals or being a collective, like we heard about in one of the readings in the devotional program. So, I mean, I think this is just so neat what's being done. And, you know, hopefully will bear a lot of fruit. I'm making all these puns here, but, you know, it looks extremely promising. I was wondering if you have, you know, you're taking an inventory and you're kind of seeing like where the gaps are, and you know, you've got really a very data-driven and scientific basis in the way that you're approaching this. I'm wondering if you have a vision of what does the end state look like, and how do we get to this end state that we want?
Well, that's exactly what one of our next steps will be. Trying to put together a stewardship plan for trees in Centertown. So that would include not only what do we want individual residents to do with the trees on their property, but what do we want to push the city to do better for trees in Centertown. So that's where the gap analysis, what kind of species we have, where are we missing trees, so that I've been working with one volunteer in particular who's a landscape architect, walking around. Well, we walked around and did a very special inventory on the western side of Centertown, just looking at front yard plantable spaces. And we developed an approach that we think would work with the limited spaces that we have. Not every yard is going to have 3 cubic feet of soil volume, but it might have 2 cubic feet, and there are trees that will fit in 2 cubic feet. Mm-hmm. So we broke it all down into how many we did for each category we identified, and presented it to the city last year. And they said, "Oh, that's interesting. Thank you very much. Can we have your database?" And we said, "Sure." But we haven't, no surprise, we haven't heard back from them. but we're going to continue pushing. We're going to expand that inventory because I really think that you were referring to the fact that it's a community of people who are doing this. We have a very active community of people. We have the support of our community association, and working with some of the other community association sponsored tree groups, I think that we can start to have some serious leverage with the city if we pool our voices.
Excellent. Stephen and Madeline?
Yeah, I just wanted to say some of the biggest challenges are, and I guess we'll have to figure out what to do about them, is we have a lot of old trees and very huge trees. But when they go, what comes back in their place, if anything, will be a very small tree, beginning tree. So we somehow have to have a bit of a process where it's staged with different ages of trees. And the other problem is development, because the way developers work now is they have a property and they just clear it. Like everything goes. And that means trees or whatever is in the way. And then maybe some trees will be put back, maybe not. And a lot of the plans for buildings now take up almost all the space, leaving very little room for trees. So far, we haven't been too badly hit in Centertown, but certainly in the western part of Centertown where we are. But if you go in the middle part of Centertown, there's a rapid reduction of trees. And but maybe one thing that would be helpful, Darlene, if you say something about how you clicked onto getting the U of T connection. So we had a program to follow, and we had that could put out maps and charts and things for us as the end result. Because some of us have been thinking about the need for maps and surveys for a number of years, but we didn't get anywhere because we didn't really have the plan to run with. And Darlene somehow found that. And so it's important that, each of us puts in our little bit of expertise and runs with that.
Well, actually, it was serendipity. It was during beginning of COVID. And a friend of mine lives in Old Ottawa South and mentioned that there was a new group forming under their environment committee, and it was going to be called the Tree Team, and they were going to do surveys. And so I thought, oh, we need that in Centertown. And so I got in touch with Mark Burgum, who was running the group, and basically we kind of piggybacked off his efforts to start the program up. We both run ours a little bit differently, but it was an inspiration. It was the inspiration of an effort by another community group that got me started on this one.
Very interesting. We have time for one more question, friends. If anyone has a question for Darlene or a comment that they would like to make, an observation. Leslie, go ahead.
So much to do with the neighborhood trees, but you're talking about Taywin, and the trees that we have lost around this new hospital that's coming is another great swath that was a terrible loss. And unfortunately, the city didn't listen to people when they said, isn't there another way to do this? This is what you mentioned in passing, that the climate and the tree people of the city, it all looks really good what they're planning to do, but then you have the developers who come in and just somehow manage to avoid all of those plans and just cut things that it would take forever to be replaced. It's just.
Well, all of that, what you're saying is all very true, and it's also true that a lot of the suburban councillors, a large portion of their campaign funding comes from developers. And same went with our previous mayor. I know that there's a group that I think put out a report just maybe it was it's coming out this week or it came out at the end of last week. They track what each councillor received in the way of donations. Previous group of councillors, inner city, none of them had donation money from developers, and no surprise, they were not on any of the powerful committees that made the decisions, either FedCo or the planning committee. So we do have a mayor that had a campaign promise of 1 million trees. So let's hold him to that.
Let's hold them to it. I agree.
Excellent. That's a good note to end on. We have an offer of a reading of a short, joyful poem on the theme of spring from Linda. Linda, did you write this poem by chance? You're muted, Linda.
Yes, I did. I wrote it many years ago and it keeps shuffling through.
Well, we'd love to hear it.
Okay. Could you let me share the screen and then I'll put it up?
Sure, Erin will do that. And thank you for offering.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Okay, you can go ahead now, Linda.
Okay. So. There we go. Spring springs. A touch of moisture suffices to dissolve the hardened clay. Spring, spring, spring bursts on the scene. Earth gives birth, grass inches up. Each blade's green soul singing. Spring sprouts, seeds, shoots, moist earth, releasing treasures. Plants press sunward. Not going up from here. Okay, sorry. I'll just repeat that. Spring sprouts, seeds, shoots, moist earth, releasing treasures, plants press sunward. Spring soaks the driest earth, flakes each parched throat, revives every barren place. Dim hearts awaken, lean into the light, and sun-warmed rise like sap in the sun's dominions. Refresh, revive, alive, alive. Spring springs, every heart a garden, alive, alive.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Linda. Beautiful metaphors, and there's something that we surely see a lot, in the writings from the various religions about nature, is that they're learning tools for us as people. They're metaphors for us as humans, to grow and develop and to bear fruit. And that's just beautiful.
Thank you.
So friends, I want to thank you all, especially Darlene, for coming and talking to us tonight and sharing, some very valuable information. It's a wonderful contribution. To everyone who read in our program, who participated with attendance and asking questions, and to our musician Lua, who's gone to other endeavors this evening. Thanks to everyone. Our next Environmental Cafe 613 will be on Tuesday, May 30th at 7:30. Our topic for May will be announced at a later date through our email. And we hope that you'll join us for that. And wish you a very good evening.
Thanks. That was wonderful.
Thank you, Darlene.
Thank you.
Thank you, Darlene. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Bill. Aaron,
Darlene.
thank you very much.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for
Thank
having me.
you.
All right.
Good night. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Here.
Have a
Wonderful
good
to
evening.
hear it. Thanks.
Bye.
Go plant a tree.
And look after it.
Yeah.